A reading from Paul's letter to the Galatians. Now, before faith came, we were imprisoned and guarded under the law until faith would be revealed. Therefore, the law was our guide until Christ came, so that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer subject to a guide. For in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. As many of you were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Grace and peace to you all. Back in February, I attended an Out Front Minnesota meeting. It was on Zoom. Out Front was founded here in Minnesota in 1987, 35 years ago. And Out Front Minnesota's mission is, quote, to create a state where lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people are free to be who they are, love who they love, and live without fear of violence, harassment, or discrimination. So on this Zoom call, there were 4 speakers. There was one school board member, a woman who lives up in Hastings. She's on the Hastings School Board, and she's the mom of a trans student. And then there were 3 legislators, Senator Scott Dibble of Minneapolis, Representative Heather Keller from Moorhead, and Representative Athena Hollins from St. Paul. I listened, I learned, I took notes, and I said, guest speaker on Pride Sunday. So I looked up what area Representative Hollins represents, and though it is not the one where the church is located, many of you live in her district. So I made an inquiry. Her assistant was lovely, gracious, prompt, and I am so pleased to say that she said yes to the invitation. So, Representative Hollins, would you please join me up here on the chancel? All right. I did ask her if she wanted to make prepared remarks, and she said, oh, no. She'd much prefer a conversation. So we're going to do a little Q&A, and if we have time, we may take a few questions from some of you. So let us get rolling. Just tell us a bit about yourself, where you grew up, your family, like the early days.
Sure. Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is amazing. I have to say that I've been to a lot of churches that were accepting of LGBTQ folks, but none that I felt were celebrating it, and that's a really beautiful difference that I'm seeing here today, so thank you. So my name's Athena Hollins, and I grew up in Hawaii, actually, born and raised in Hawaii, and ended up moving to Minnesota for law school. Yep, and met my partner in law school, and he's from St. Paul, so that's how we ended up here.
Okay. And what about your family of origin, your folks?
So my family, my dad is from Birmingham, Alabama, and my mother is from Seattle, Washington. My dad was stationed in the military in Oahu, and he ended up loving it and wanting to stay, and so that's how they ended up making a home in Hawaii.
Oh, gosh, okay. So tell us a little bit. You referenced your schooling. You came here for school. Tell us about that.
Yes, I went to University of St. Thomas School of Law. I came here because of the social justice mission that St. Thomas focused on. My goal in going to law school was not to work at a large law firm and make a lot of money. My goal was to do civil rights and human rights work, because that was what I was drawn to as, I think, as a black woman and also as a queer woman, that it was incredibly important to me to be giving back to my communities and to be working in conjunction with community. And so that was always my goal. And I kind of fell in love with Minnesota. And also I couldn't talk my husband into moving back to Hawaii. He
Okay.
did not want to do that.
Okay, great. And when you're not working and not legislating, what do you just do for fun? Just a little bit of, what do you enjoy?
Yeah, well, I have 2 kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, so I spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
As much time outdoors as I possibly can, hiking, swimming, going to playgrounds. And then I also do quilting in my spare time. And I mean, I don't know. I like to go out dancing if I can, but that doesn't happen very often anymore.
Nice. Okay, so you were elected in 2020. We all know what was happening in 2020, right? What a crazy time to come into the legislature. Why did you run for political office?
Well, so to be clear, I started running in 2019 before the pandemic hit. So I did not anticipate that necessarily. But I decided to run for office because I felt that there needed to be better representation from the entire district. So my district stretches all the way from Como Park to the east side of St. Paul. And there's a really big, there's a lot of disparities and discrepancies. It's a very diverse district, right? And there's the wealthier side and the less wealthy side. And really my goal was to make sure that all of the individuals from the entire district were being represented well, including those folks who maybe didn't have the luxury and time and privilege to come to the Capitol because they are taking care of their kids or they have to work multiple jobs, and recognizing that as fair as we try to make our democracy, it doesn't always work out that way for everybody. So wanting to make sure that everybody was represented equally.
How far east is east for your district?
So I live on the very farthest east side of my district.
Okay.
So it is to Arcade Avenue, if you're familiar with Arcade.
Okay.
That's how far east my district goes.
Okay. Who influenced you or mentored you or encouraged you into this life of public service?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, I think I have to first recognize my mother, who is a social worker and who has always been really dedicated to working with young people as well as domestic violence victims, sexual violence victims. And then in the political realm, though, we have so many amazing elected officials in the Ramsey County area who really have taken me under their wing and helped me. I think in particular, Trista Matas Castillo, who was the county commissioner, has been a phenomenal friend and mentor to me. My prior boss, when I worked at Thomson Reuters for a while, was Sharon Sales Belton, the former mayor of Minneapolis.
Gosh.
And even though she was just my supervisor, she really provided a lot of insight and guidance for me, both while I was there working with her, but then also afterwards. I've been able to touch base with her and ask her opinion on, how to handle certain situations.
Huh. Important people, right?
Yeah.
We all have important people who help us, encourage us, teach us. Okay, so what have you learned in your first term?
I've learned so much. So first, I guess my own, hubris. The fact that I really was interested in climate and energy work and addressing climate change as sort of the existential crisis of at least my generation, if not all of our generations. And I kind of just thought that if we had explained it right and if we were, just said the right things and presented the facts, that we would sway people. And I learned that that's not true. So that was really eye-opening for me. But I also learned how, and I think the example with the children was the perfect, most beautiful example, how we really can come together about common causes and common values. And and be willing to work on things, even when we are worlds apart in a lot of different areas. There's always some common ground that we can find that we can all agree is something that needs to change. And so that's been really heartening for me.
Okay. Well, it is Pride Sunday, and just a bit about this congregation's history and values and commitments. We are part of the United Church of Christ, and in that denomination, it's called Open and Affirming. For any church that goes through a process of learning and discovering and then ultimately voting if they want to be open and affirming. And this congregation did that back in 1998, which was long before my time. So for almost 25 years, St. Anthony Park United Church of Christ has been open and affirming. So that means LGBTQ folks are welcome here in every possible way, in leadership and membership and worship and the choir and on and on and on. We also prioritize a faith-based human sexuality curriculum for our youth. So they are given the option in 8th and 9th grade to go through what we call OWL, which stands for Our Whole Lives, which is the most comprehensive and amazing human sexuality curriculum we think out there. I have officiated at many same-sex weddings with incredible gladness and joy. And every June, at the last Sunday of the month, we do celebrate Pride. So that's just a bit about us. So how are you connected to LGBTQ plus? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So I do identify as bisexual, and I am one of, I think there are 4 open LGBTQ representatives at the Minnesota State House.
Huh.
So it's a small pool, but there are several of us. And so I co-chaired the Queer Alliance in my undergrad, and I was also the co-chair of the Outlaw group, which is the LGBTQ group for law students.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Outlaw.
Nice.
And that was at St. Thomas at the Catholic Law School, so that was a really interesting experience.
Yeah.
We actually got a lot of flack from other Catholic law schools for not being Catholic enough because we did have an outlaw group.
Okay.
But I think it was really important for us to have like a safe and welcoming space at the law school so that everybody felt like they were able to be their whole selves when they were going there. Because, not everybody who attended St. Thomas was Catholic, and so, and even there were folks who identified as LGBTQ. And so making sure that they felt like they were, loved and that this was a good space for them and it was a place where they were going to be respected and able to bring their whole selves to school.
Did that exist before you got there, or did you help create it?
I did not create it.
Okay.
It existed before I got there.
Okay. Lovely. So if we take the long view, it's helpful to take the long view in terms of government and legislation. So as you think about specific gains or accomplishments, progress that's happened in our state for LGBTQ folks, what would you kind of tick off on your list?
I mean, first I have to say our state is actually incredibly progressive on this, right? Like we had some of the first legislation and first city ordinances that recognized a lot of LGBTQ rights in the entire country.
Huh.
So I did an internship at the Department of Civil Rights in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis has like the longest ordinance ever recognizing those rights for individuals within the city of Minneapolis. So we've done really well overall. I think, of course, the big ones that we're looking at was the marriage equality fight that happened and that we were very successful in. And I think it's hard for me to talk about this today because of the recent Supreme Court decision, which has kind of thrown everything up back into the air again, unfortunately. As a lawyer and a law nerd, Justice Thomas's concurrence in that decision was very overtly, he wants to revisit the decisions that legalized same-sex marriage and that legalized a lot of privacy issues, for that impact LGBTQ communities. And so I think it's a little difficult to talk about because it hurts.
Yeah.
But I think in general we've done really well here in Minnesota. We have a lot of work on the equality and access to access to care, but also access to being able to file lawsuits and have those discrimination claims being heard. So in general we've done pretty well. I'm always worried, it's always kind of a slippery slope about what we can continue to do. What will stick.
What will stick. All right. Okay, so just talk with us, to us about some legislative work yet to be accomplished. Like what you are working on or your colleagues are working on. What are some of the priorities that are in the queue?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, honestly. So the big one that I was working on for the entire term was conversion therapy. And if you're not familiar with conversion therapy, it is not really a therapy at all, not recognized as a therapy by any legitimate board. And it is a practice where they try to convert LGBTQ people to being straight. And it's incredibly destructive. There are increased rates of suicide for people who have gone through it, increased rates of self-harm, of feelings of dissatisfaction, self-hate, that can be really, really detrimental, and especially to young people. So the conversion therapy bill that I was carrying was to make it illegal for this practice to be done on children, on people 18 or younger, and or vulnerable adults. So recognizing that when you're an adult and you make a decision that you want to go through this process, that's up to you. We can't necessarily control what you do there, but we can protect children and say that this is not a legitimate form of therapy and this is something that is harmful, actively harmful to them.
And where is that in process?
I mean, it was really difficult because we had a really great hearing on it, and it was scheduled to be included in the Health and Human Services Omnibus, and then was removed because it was too controversial, which I think is especially upsetting because there are a lot of things that we can argue about, right, about how we feel morally, but there's literal facts and statistics and data that say that this practice is harmful. However you feel about homosexuality on your own, we know that this practice is hurting our kids. And it has been denounced by the American Medical Association, the Psychology Association. I mean, every single board and practice area that you can think of has said that this is not a good practice. And it was still deemed to be, even by my DFL House colleagues, that it would be too controversial.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yes.
Which is painful.
Painful. Yeah.
I can talk about other bills too.
Please,
if you want.
sure.
Sorry.
What else?
Well, let's see. There's Logan's Law, which, if you're not familiar with Logan's Law, so currently in Minnesota statute, there's a lot of gendered language, even though we've eliminated, even though we have same-sex marriages and we have, lesbian couples who, through in vitro fertilization, have children, the person who births the child is the mother, but the person who did not birth the child is not necessarily considered to be a parent. And so they would have to go through an adoption process to adopt their own child, even though they've been there through the entire process with the other parent. And so Logan's Law seeks to eliminate that requirement and instead just say this person, on the birth certificate acknowledges that they are the parent and therefore they have all the rights of the parent. It's it's especially scary because a lot of folks don't realize that that is something that they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if something happens to that birth mom, the other person doesn't necessarily have any rights to that child, which is really terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the adoption process is long and
Expensive, yes.
And, really, I won't want to say uncomfortable, but I mean, you have to get fingerprinted, you have to have background checks. I mean, it's a big hassle. I used to practice family law, and adoption is no joke. It's hard work. So we want to eliminate that requirement to make sure that those kids have their two parents who have been there for them that entire time, and allow them to have those rights to their children to support them.
And where does that one stand?
So that one is currently, we're working on it right now.
Okay.
We wanted to really make sure that we got all the language exactly right, and we are working with some national groups to make sure, because there's been some versions of Logan's Law that have been passed in other states that didn't exactly do what they anticipated, and so we want to make sure that we've got all of the legal precedent and all of the, dot all our I's and cross all our T's.
Yeah.
But we anticipate bringing that forward next session.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, this is one that in my mind shouldn't be terribly controversial because, if we say we want two parents to be raising kids, this is this is the natural option to allow that to actually happen. So, I mean, that being said, it's more of a culture war thing than a, logic or values question, which, makes it always difficult when we're talking about divided legislature. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Any other ones you want to touch on?
Oh, sure. So I've got a couple of bills that are specifically related to the trans community. So one of them is making it easier to change the designation, the sex designation on your birth certificate. And this one, again, should not be terribly controversial because you're already allowed to change it. What it would do is just bring it into conformity around the state so that there's a clear process for everybody to be able to follow. And that's something we've actually gotten feedback from judges who said, we need a process. We don't know what we're doing here. And each judge kind of, creates their own rule, or certain cities will create their own process. But to have something all in conformity, everybody knows the process, it just makes everything a lot smoother and easier. So that's one of the bills that I was carrying, and then and I'm saying I was carrying, but that's just because a lot of the LGBTQ bills fall on the LGBTQ members. They just are, it's what happens. And I have another bill that would make it easier for trans individuals to get gender-affirming care. So right now, insurance companies, depending on which insurance company, can have higher levels of requirements for that gender-affirming care to prove that it's needed. And so this would, again, bring it into conformity, have the same level, and no extra hurdles that people have to jump through in order to get that care that, again, a lot of times really can make the difference between a lot of self-worth and really, self-harm and suicidal ideation and things like that. So really it's about protecting people and making sure that they get to live their best lives without hurdles they have to jump through for insurance companies.
Yeah.
And then I'll say the last one I have is, and I don't know that I would say this is directly related to the LGBT community, but it's making HIV medication easier to access. So making it so that you can access both the post, after you've been diagnosed with HIV, and then the pre as well. So it's called PEP and PrEP.
Okay.
So post-exposure and pre-exposure. But making that medication available through pharmacies, because we found after the pandemic that pharmacies are really crucial places for us to be, like, in communities, right? It's where people are getting their shots. It's where you get your tests for COVID. And it makes it so much easier for people who are at higher risk of getting HIV or who might not have that steady care that they need to have during that time period, be able to access medication that really keeps them safe and keeps them healthy.
Yeah. You got a lot on your desk.
I do.
Now, do you have another job?
Not currently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What can we as a faith community do to support you and to support justice initiatives?
I mean, I think exactly what you're doing right now, you know, being open, being proud, being supportive. Like I said, there's such a difference. So before I was in the legislature, I did diversity, equity, and inclusion work for the legal field. And we always talk about the difference between accepting diversity versus celebrating it. And what we really need to do to be a more inclusive society is to celebrate all of the diversity that we have, including, you know, our LGBTQ communities, because a lot of times there's a lot of like, we accept you, and that sounds like tolerance, which is great, but to tolerate somebody is not the same thing as to bring them in, to hold them close, to love them as your own, right, as your neighbor, as your community member. And, you know, to me, as a faith community, that's the most important thing that we can do, is to say, you're welcome here, and more than welcome, like, we want you to be here. You are an integral part of our community, and you bring a richness to our community.
So true.
That we need. Because I think it's very lonely, and especially right now with the Supreme Court decision that's coming out, knowing that we have allies is so important. Knowing that there are people who are going to stand up and fight for us, and fight for, you know, our basic human rights is, I mean, it's crucial. It's, you know, it can feel like a life or death situation, and I think that's, you know, in addition to like voting, please vote. Basic things like participate in your democracy, you know, attend rallies if there are things that are there. But I think making a statement as a church too, having these, you know, special days that you're recognizing this, and then, you know, reaching out to those communities in the way that you were doing, you know, going to out front meetings. You know, I think that sort of outreach, that proactive outreach, is really, really important for supporting communities.
Gosh, aren't we lucky to have her at the legislature? Oh my, yay! Yes. And I would like to take one or two questions. So if anybody's, we got a hand. Okay.
I've been struggling with an issue.
Been struggling with, hold on, someone's going to come by and give you the mic.
I don't have that one.
Here we go.
Can you hear me? You need a mic.
There you go.
Okay. I've been struggling with an issue, and it occurs to me that it goes right to accepting and celebrating. If I were to leave here and introduce you and say you were a lesbian and you were black, it helped me that you self-identified as a lesbian and a black. It almost gave me permission to include that in an explanation of you. But I might also say you're very intelligent, you're very good public speaker, you really answered all the questions well in describing you. I wouldn't introduce her as heterosexual. Why should I introduce you as homosexual? Where is the line between helping somebody understand who someone is and the issues they stand for, and not treading on their sacred parts, and yet celebrating who they are? That's a struggle for me to explain somebody else to somebody else in public and choose the right words that will be perceived as the celebration of who this person is and all the work they've done, rather than just adjectives or adverbs describing that person. So how do you help us walk and move in the right direction?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. And I have fielded a similar question to this when I was doing diversity and equity work in the legal field, because I do think that, especially who we love is so central to who we are, but also not something that we necessarily want to share with everybody all the time, right? And so I don't think that we need to introduce individuals as, this is Athena, she's bisexual. We don't necessarily need to categorize or to identify individuals in that way. But I do think that, if I was going to use descriptors for myself, I would probably say, this is Athena, she works in the field of equity, she's, more about what I do rather than who I am necessarily. I can see, you don't want to tokenize individuals, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's always fair to ask people, ask them individually and say, how would you like me to introduce you? Or is it okay if I share this aspect of you when I'm introducing you to something? And I think everybody's going to be different on that. Some people are loud and proud and they're like, yeah, I want people to know. And other folks are incredibly private. And are, they're like, that's not anybody's business but mine and my partner's. And I think we just have to respect those boundaries and those differences. And I think, when you, sorry, I'm thinking about yesterday, I was at the Pride Festival and I was asked 3 or 4 times, what are you? And it was it became very exhausting after a while to have to explain my heritage, and I'm not Hawaiian, but I'm from Hawaii, and it can become really exhausting. And so the first time somebody asked me is probably a totally different experience than the third or fourth time somebody asked me, right? And so I think it's fair to always just defer to the person themselves and say, how do you feel about this? How would you like me to introduce you? Are you comfortable with this?
Yeah, good. Let's do one more. Jill. Boy, your hand went right up. Okay.
How do you maintain and grow hope? And I've heard all the things that you've done and you're doing. I'm sure that's part of your answer. But how are you germinating hope through what we're going through and have gone through?
Question about hope.
Yeah, I'm so emotional right now. That's a really hard one. It's really hard for me to answer that right now. I will say in 2020, when we were really being inundated by the national level, what gave me hope, national level politics, what really gave me hope was local politics, was walking around my neighborhood, door knocking in my district, and realizing that we all have so much in common, and these things that we care about are so universal, and that brought me a lot of hope and a lot of joy, because I feel like we were so divided on a national level that just seeing at least in the local sense, we're fairly unified, and even though we are very diverse and very different groups, we all believe that basic human dignity, and we believe that people should be cared for, and that gave me a lot of hope. And what's giving me hope right now is the knowledge that we're all in this together, and we're fighting for something that's larger than ourselves. For me, a lot of these issues that I'm fighting for are not necessarily going to impact me, but they might impact my daughter. They might impact, young people who are in school right now. And when they tell me that I'm speaking for them, that I'm representing what they, their fears, and I'm representing their fight, that provides me, at least, I don't know if it provides me with hope, but it provides me with strength to continue on. Because even if I don't feel hope every single day, I know that I have to keep fighting, you know, even when I'm sad. I know it's not the perfect answer, and I'm sorry.
No, it's a real answer. It's an honest answer. Athena, we see you, we hear you, we honor you, we are grateful for you, and we give thanks to God for you. Thank you.